So welcome to the class. So today's our topic is organization of computer. So let us start our lesson. So this computer is organized in four different categories. The number one is input unit, number two is CPU, number three is memory unit, and number four is output unit. So let us start with the very first one, the input unit. So what is this input unit? From the word itself, input, to take the input. Okay, so this unit, it is used to provide data, instructions and various operating commands to the computer, and it is used to receive data and instruction from the user and transmit them to CPU for further processing. So what does this mean? So this input device, so what are the input device? Suppose for example keyboard, mouse, etc. are the input device. So with the help of which the user provides the data instructions to the memory, and that is transmitted to the CPU for the further processing. So with the help of this input unit, we can provide the input and then after it will be transmitted to the CPU for the further processing. So in the same way, so in the next one is CPU. So we know that CPU is central processing unit, or we can also call it as a brain of a computer. And what does the brain do? It does all the processing part. So in our human, we the human are also a computer, and our brain, this brain is a CPU, and this brain does all the calculation part and all the processing part. Okay, so then after the CPU, what does the CPU do? It receives data and instruction from the memory which was stored with the help of input unit. Input unit provides the data, information and other operating command data instructions, and it is stored in the memory, and it receives, the CPU receive this data and instruction from the memory for the further execution, and then that will be executed. So now next is execute instruction. The instruction which is received from the memory, that instruction will be executed. The instruction may be of many types. It may be to fetch the data from the memory. Fetch भनेको जुन data stored भएको छ मेमोरीमा, त्यो मेमोरीबाट निकालेर हेर्नु के छ, read and write, त्यसलाई पढ्ने हेर्ने. If suppose for example एउटा want some data, so we have stored some like for example we have stored a video in a computer memory, and then after if you want to view that video, that is called reading. If you want to view that video, what will you do? You will go to that video, and then after you will double click it, and then after you start watching, and all these are done by CPU. So it executes the data, it is executing the data that you have stored. The data like execute and it also executes the instruction. Suppose for example instruction may be of many types. Like for example, in a memory we have stored like for example this mathematical operation. One execution is mathematical operation. Suppose for example you have inputted, you have stored two values, for example 2 and 5. So these two are the data, and then after you will give the instruction. These two are the input which is provided by the input unit with the help of the input unit by the user. User ke halyo duita input halyo 2 and 5, and then after the further calculation has to be done. And what is the instruction? So I will give the instruction to add these two numbers, add these two numbers. Now this number 2 will be added, and then after the value is 7. So that means the instruction is executed. What is the instruction? Instruction is given, the mathematical instruction is given to add these two numbers, and what is the value? 7. And this 7 or the value, then after another function of CPU is to store the result back to the memory. So this is the result, okay, and this result will be stored back to the memory. So this is how the central processing unit or CPU works. Okay, so all the processing part is done. So before doing the processing part, first the data or the instruction, it has to be stored in the memory. And again, this central processing unit or CPU, it has two components. So what are the components of CPU? The number one is ALU and the number one is CU. What is this ALU? ALU is known as arithmetical logical unit. Arithmetic and logic unit. And what does this do? So this is CPU. Okay, this CPU, it is composed of two parts, ALU and CU. So all the arithmetical and the logical operations are performed with the help of this unit. So what are the arithmetical operations? All the addition, plus addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, all these are the arithmetical operation, and it is performed with the help of this ALU unit. And another is logical operation. So what are the logical operations? All the comparison operators are known as the logical operations. So comparison means lesser than, greater than, lesser than equals to, greater than equals to, equals to. Okay, I'll do like this. Less than, greater than equals to, not equals to. All these are the comparison operator. And to perform this logical operation, so ALU is used. So there are other logical operations also, like and, or, and, not. These are also logical operators, and, or, and, not. So this will say, this will we'll study about this one in further coming topics. So let's see this ALU. So ALU, it performs all the mathematical operations and all the logical operations. So what are there in logical operations? All the comparison operators and logical operations, like and, or, and, not. All these are the logical operators. Okay, so all the logical operation and mathematical operation are performed by this unit ALU. Now next one is CU, control unit. So what does this control unit do? So this control unit, it controls all the operations which is performed during these operations. Okay, like control unit, it controls the flow of data and information. So with data and information, so what is that? So when you store, so the very first one, with the help of this input unit, you store the data into the memory. You store the data into the memory, and then after that data will be fetched by CPU. The data will be fetched by the CPU for the processing, and after that processing, again it will be written back to the memory to store the result. So this flow of data and information is all controlled by the control unit. And again, it also controls the sequence of operations. Sequence of operations. So what are the sequence of operations? Sequence of operation is the sequence of instructions given. So in a time, it also controls the timing. Okay, so sequence of operation means, so first you have given the instruction for addition, then after the instruction for subtraction, multiplication, so it controls these instructions or operations. So first what you have given, the addition instruction. So first the addition instructions will be executed, and then after the subtraction instruction or the operation will be executed. Suppose for example, I'll give an example. Suppose if you are copying two data from one hard drive to another hard drive, so it will copy it in a sequence. So the very first one, जुन पहिले copy गर्ने instruction दिएको थियो, first data, so first that will be copied, and then after the second data, so that second data will be copied. That means it controls the sequence of operations. जुन इन्स्ट्रक्सन पहिलेदेखि the first instruction which has been given, so first that will be executed, and then after the second instruction which is given, and that will be executed at the second time, and then so on and so forth. And now next one is, it helps to send result to the memory. Again the same thing. After processing all this, it will be, all the result will be sent back to the memory. After processing means what? After processing, the result will be stored again back to the memory. So first the data is, so let us recap. First, with the help of this input units, data and information will be stored in the memory, and from that memory the CPU will retrieve the data and information from the memory for the further execution, which is done by the CPU. Okay, and then after that execution or instruction is executed, it will be stored back to the memory. And again, the CPU are of two types. The components of CPU, that means ALU and CU. ALU does all the arithmetic and logical operations, and control unit, it controls the flow of information. You know this flow of information. This is the flow of information. First, the value will be, data will be stored from the input unit. Data will be stored in the memory, and then after it will be sent to the CPU for the processing, and after processing, that information will be stored back to the memory. So in control unit, the flow of data is this one, and controls the sequence of operation. Sequence of operation means the first the instruction which is given in the first part will be executed first, and then after the second instruction will be executed at the second time. Now next one is, it helps to send back the result to the memory. Okay, so these two are the input and input unit and central processing. The next one is memory unit. Now the next one is memory unit. So now let us see what is this memory unit. Actually, this memory unit is nothing but it is a storage device or the storage unit where the data or the informations are stored, where the data and informations are stored. And mainly it is of two types, primary memory and secondary memory. This primary memory is also known as main memory. So with the help of this primary memory, the information or the data which is stored in that memory, it is used by the CPU for the further processing. Okay, so the input which is given by the, which was provided by the user, it is stored in the primary memory, and from that memory the CPU fetches the data and the information from that memory for the further execution. So the values are stored in this primary memory, which is used by the CPU for the execution. And this primary or main memory is also known, are also of two types, RAM and ROM, that is random access memory and read only memory. So about these two, we will see this one in the next session. So now the next one is secondary memory. So secondary memory, so hard disk, pen drive, CD, all these are the secondary memory. And remember one thing, this primary memory, it is volatile in nature. In this primary memory, it is also known as temporary memory. So that means the data which is stored in this memory is for temporary timing. Okay, and the data which is stored in the secondary memory, it is stored permanently. So these are two types of memory units. So memory unit is mainly used to store the data. So now, and about this memory unit, we will discuss this one in the next session. So now next one is output unit. So output unit. So what does this output unit do? So this output unit, the result from the memory, after the processing, the result is stored in the memory, and the result from that memory are taken to the output unit. So result from that memory is taken to the output unit and shown in user understandable form. So the values or the information which is stored in the memory back to the memory after processing, that will be taken up by the output unit to show in the user understandable form. So what is this you have? So now next one is the main function of this output unit. So main function of output unit is to convert the machine readable form. So what is this machine readable form? So we have learned about this binary. This machine readable form is also known as binary language, because see this computer, it can read only binary language, that means in the forms of zeros and ones. So all the calculation, so all the data that we store, it will be stored in the memory in the form of machine readable form. Okay, and then after that, value from the memory will be fetched by the CPU for the further processing, and it will be processed and stored in the memory, and that is also in machine readable form. And the use of this output unit is it will convert this machine readable form, that is in which is in the form of zeros and one, and it will convert it into our user understandable form, that means our human understandable form, and it will be shown to us in our understandable form. And the example of that, these output units are monitor, okay, printer, etc. So there are many output units. So these are some name of the output units where we can see the information, where we can view the result from the memory in our human understandable form. So there are four categories of organization of computers. So input, CPU, memory, and output. So in input unit, it is used to input or store the data. The input unit helps to store the data into the memory, and that data is provided by the user, and after that it will be stored in the memory. And this next one is CPU. CPU will fetch the data or information from the memory, and it does all the processing which has to be done upon that instruction or the data, and again the result will be stored back to the memory. And now next is memory unit. So memory unit means the storage device where the data are stored, and mainly it is of two types, primary and secondary memory. Primary memory is also known as main memory. So the information which is data or information which is stored in the primary memory, only that data will be taken up by the CPU for the processing. And then and again this primary memory are of two types, RAM and ROM. So this one we'll see in the next chapter, next session. And next one is secondary memory. So secondary memory means hard disk, pen drive, etc. All these CD are the secondary memory. And the difference between these two memory is this are in primary memory, the data stored in the primary memory, it is not stored for the it is stored only for a short period of time, and in secondary memory the data are stored permanently. In primary memory the data are stored only for temporary. And output unit, it is used to display or show the result from the memory. And the types of output units are monitor, printer, etc. So this much in computer organization. So thank you. So we'll see in the next class.